12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. What do you think they saw in Canaan? 10 were bad and 2 were good. Some saw giants big and strong. Some saw grapes with clusters long. Some saw God was in it all. 10 were bad and 2 were good. You ever heard that song before? Maybe right now you're staring at your screen like, what in the world is happening? Hey, listen, let's sing it again. Maybe you remember this song from Sunday school when you were a kid. I'll put the words on the screen. Try to sing along with me, would you? Let's try it one more time. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. What do you think they saw in Canaan? 10 were bad and 2 were good. Some saw giants big and strong. Some saw grapes with clusters long. Some saw God was in it all. 10 were bad and 2 were good. All right. Thanks. If you sang along with me, thanks for doing that. You know, that song is a catchy little kid song, maybe sung in Sunday school. That song is based out of the story that we're going to look at today. After a 1-week break, we're resuming our series in the book of Numbers. And Israel is at the front door of the Promised Land. And this is going to be a pivotal moment in their history. They're right there at the border. Here's what happens in Numbers chapter 13. If you're taking notes, you could write this down. They gather the group. Here's what we read in Numbers 13, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Send men to scout out the land of Canaan I am giving to the Israelites. Send one man who is a leader among them from each of their ancestral tribes." Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran at the Lord's command. All the men were leaders in Israel. So God tells Moses to send out a group. They're going to scout out the land of Canaan. Now, Canaan is the promised land. Okay, that's where we're headed here. What you need to know, that this wasn't a group of just anybody. Like, you couldn't just volunteer to go on this trip, right? Like, these were hand-picked guys. These were 12 leaders, one from each tribe. These were men who people knew. These were men who people respected, people who had a lot of life experience. Their wisdom, their opinion, it mattered to the people. But it begs the question, why did God want the land scouted in the first place? Why did he opt to do that? I mean, did God not know what the land was like? Was he not quite confident that they were in the right place? Was God unsure how difficult the battle for it was going to be? Did God not have all the information he needed? Of course not. God already knew the outcome, right? He knows where they're going. Besides all the promises that he had already made, look at what he said there in verse 2. Did you see it? He said, "Scout out the land that I am giving to the Israelites." He knows the end result. So why did he want it scouted? Well, hang on to that thought. We'll come back to it. Let me go to the next part of the story. Moses gives the spies their instructions. They're getting ready to head out. Now, in the next several verses, verses 4 through 15, we see a list of names. These are the leaders that get picked. That's what's happening in verses 4 through 15. In verse 16, here's how it picks up. These were the names of the men Moses sent to scout out the land. And Moses renamed one of them Hoshea, son of Nun. He renamed Hoshea to Joshua. That's going to be important. When Moses sent them to scout out the land of Canaan, he told them, "Go up this way to the Negev, then go up into the hill country. See what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. Is the land they live in good or bad? Are the cities they live in encampments or fortifications? Is the land fertile or unproductive? Are there trees in it or not? Be courageous. Bring back some fruit from the land." It was the season for the first ripe grapes. And so in the following verses, we read about how the guys head out and they follow the path that was given to them. And they're gone, not just for a week. They're not gone for 2 weeks. They're gone for 40 days. What must the rest of the people have been thinking about during those 40 days? The anticipation, maybe the waking up every morning and scanning the horizon. Do they see the group coming back? When are they ever going to return? Is everything okay? Yeah, I've got somebody in my house that's got a new driver's license, and they're enjoying their newfound freedom, having the driver's license and being able to go to the store or go to work or wherever it is that they want to go. They're enjoying it. His mother and I, it's been a little bit more of a challenge for us, I think, just in the idea, and maybe you can relate to this if you've had this happen in your house before, where you just want everything to be okay. You want them to be safe. And they leave, and you're knowing and thinking the whole time while they're gone, I wonder when they're going to get back. Are they safe? Of course, technology nowadays, I can open up an app and see where they're at. I can see how fast they're driving. It'd be like, okay, yeah, it makes sense that that's where they are at this point in time, or I see they're on their way back. They should be home in 5 minutes, and that gives us a little bit of peace of mind. They didn't have technology like that, of course, back then. They couldn't send pictures of, hey, here's what we're seeing, or send a text. Well, you made it to the campsite, all is well. Didn't sleep as good last night. They can't do things like that. There's just this barrier between them, and for 40 days this goes on. But finally, the group returns, and they bring a report that is the classic good news, bad news situation. So they start with the good news. They say, this land is great. It is bountiful. It is plentiful. It had amazing fruit and resources. In verse 23, it says, they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, which was carried on a pole by 2 men. Now, when you think of a cluster of grapes, I don't know what you think of. I think of like when I go to Walmart or Wegmans or the grocery store, and you go in, you're looking for just a grape cluster, and they've got them usually like in the little bags or something like that. Like that's a cluster of grapes. Not so here. The cluster of grapes was so large, so heavy, that they had to carry it on a pole between 2 guys. And that is such a famous image, this cluster of grapes. Israel, even in today's time, Israel has a Ministry of Tourism department, and the Ministry of Tourism logo is this. Here's a couple different ones that they've had, and you can see this is such a well-known passage, a well-known picture, that their image, their logo for the Ministry of Tourism is 2 people carrying a cluster of grapes. Isn't that amazing? In verse 27, it says, they reported to Moses, we went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey, and here is some of its fruit. I mean, this is a good piece of land. That's the good news. Now the bad news. Here's what they say, verse 28. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. So the bad news is these guys are way too powerful. They're way too strong. We won't be able to get into their cities. And even if we could get into the cities, they are bigger than us, they are stronger than us, they're tougher than us. We don't want to take these guys on. This is where that part of the song, 10 were bad and 2 were good, referring to the 12 spies. This is where the part of the song comes from. Here's what we read now in verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people. Caleb was one of the spies in the presence of Moses and said, let's go up now and take possession of the land, because we can certainly conquer it. Now we read in later verses that there were 2 spies, Caleb and then Joshua, who we heard about a second ago. They were saying, hey, let's go conquer this land. But the other 10, here's what they did. The men who had gone up with them responded, we can't attack the people because they are stronger than we are. So they gave a negative report to the Israelites about the land that they had scouted. The land we pass through to explore is one that devours its inhabitants. And all the people we saw in it are men of great size. To ourselves, we seemed like grasshoppers. What a picture that is. And we must have seemed the same way to them. You ever think about that with like toddlers or babies, that they're born into this world and everybody around them is a giant. What must that be like for them? Now, we don't remember probably when we were that little, but just think now, if you suddenly only ever came up to anybody's like knees and you're looking around at all of these tall people, how overwhelming that must be, how intimidating that would be. That's how these guys felt when they were scouting out the land. And here, as I mentioned, Israel is at a pivotal moment in their history. This is one of those times that they're going to look back at for quite a while. Now, let me recap where we've been. Way back in the book of Genesis, God makes a promise to Abraham. Right, we read this promise, this covenant, Genesis chapter 12. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you." He's talking about Canaan there, the promised land. "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." God is making this promise to this group of people. That's where all of this starts. But we know it hasn't been a straight line from here to there, so to speak. The Israelites were slaves in Egypt. They're held in captivity under this tyrannical rule. And God frees them. He leads them out through the 10 plagues. He works through Pharaoh in a way that only God can. And then with the Egyptians chasing them, and the Red Sea is the only thing in front of them, God parts the Red Sea and allows this miraculous escape. God continues to affirm the promises that He's made to this group of people over and over. He reminds them of what it is that He's promised to do, that He's going to make them into a great nation. And even now, God is literally with them. We talked about that in week 1, that the presence of God is there. They're following it in the cloud or the pillar of fire at night. God is sustaining millions of people on this journey through the wilderness. And now, at this time in history, they're on the border of the Promised Land. And God started this process with the scouts by saying to them, "Go take a look at the land that I am going to give you." You know, when you think back to your life, can you pinpoint a time or two when everything seemed to hang on a response or maybe a decision you had to make? Maybe you knew it in the moment. Maybe you didn't fully appreciate the ramifications or the consequences of your decision until later. That's where the Israelites are at right now. They're standing on the border of the Promised Land, listening to the spies with the good news, but the bad news as well. They spent 40 days scouting out the land that God promised to give them, and 10 of them are saying, "No way." 2 of them are saying, "This land is ours." And how they would choose to respond in this moment is going to dictate the rest of their lives. The Israelites are, figuratively speaking, getting ready to cross the Rubicon. You ever heard that phrase? You know what it means? Crossing the Rubicon? I had heard it enough to know a little bit of what it meant, but I didn't know where it came from. I did some digging. Now, if you don't know what it means, to say someone is crossing the Rubicon, it's this metaphor that means someone is making an irreversible decision. They're crossing over something that's kind of like a point of no return. Where does this phrase come from? Well, back in 49 BC, Julius Caesar was this Roman general. Maybe you've heard that name before. He was governor of what is now modern-day France. And according to Roman law, no general was allowed to bring his army into Italy, into Rome there, because it was seen as an act of war against the Roman Republic if you did that, if you brought your army in. To bring an army into Italy, and actually to be able to do that, you had to cross a river. And this little river that marked part of the boundary of Italy at that time, this little river was called the Rubicon. So Julius Caesar has been in years of just this political tension with the Senate of Rome, with his rival, and he had a choice to make. He could disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, but he's likely to face arrest and exile. If he does that, that's not necessarily a great choice. Or he can go ahead and march on into Rome, cross the river, and risk civil war. So Caesar chose to cross the Rubicon. And this one single decision, you couldn't walk back from it. He triggered a civil war that led to the collapse of the Roman Republic. Caesar becomes dictator for life, and ultimately it leads to the rise of the Roman Empire. So that's where the Israelites are at, figuratively speaking. They're getting ready to cross the Rubicon. They're getting ready to make a decision that they can't walk back from. Have you ever made a decision like that? And it's maybe this moment right here why God wanted the land scouted. The text doesn't tell us for sure, so I'm kind of reading in between the lines here a little bit, but this seems to maybe be a final test for the Israelites. Over and over and over again in their history, we've seen them just complain, lack trust in who God is and what He had promised to do. So here's one more chance to do the right thing. One more opportunity to pass the test. I'm going to give you one more try. Are they going to go the way of the 10 or the way of the 2? Now, you probably know the story. Spoiler alert, they're going to go the way of the 10. Now, this story actually takes up chapters 13 and 14. And when I had originally mapped this series out, we were going to cover both chapters in our time together today. But as I began to study and write things down, it struck me here that there's just 2 really huge applications that we need to take from this. You know, what is it that we can learn? I think there's 2 different things. And I didn't feel that I could do either one of them justice if we tried to do both of them today. So we're actually going to pause the story here when they're right here ready to make this decision and take a look at one application. And the next week we'll take chapter 14, finish the story out, and look at the second application. So what is it just so far here in chapter 13 that we can learn from this? Well, let's ask ourselves the question, why are there 2 different reports? Right? Why are 10 guys saying no chance and 2 guys are saying it's ours? But they had the same set of facts, right? They saw the same things. They saw that it was good land, that it was plentiful and bountiful in its harvest. They all saw that. They all saw that there were really strong people, giants, these mighty, fearsome warriors. They all saw that. They all saw the cities were heavily defended, that they were fortified. Archaeologists' exploration suggests that the walls of these cities that they had scouted out, just the walls around them, were 30 to 50 feet high. That's giant. And not only are they 30 to 50 feet high, that they're 15 feet thick. They all saw that. And the 10 had put together this equation that, you know what, quite frankly, if we're being honest here, their equation, it made a lot of sense. Right, here's their equation. Giants plus strongly defended cities divided by life experience equals loss. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you're just looking at this, you see these giants, these warriors that are stronger than you see what it would take to get into the cities, you've lived a lot of life, you know how things like this can go. Loss, that makes sense. But the other 2, Joshua and Caleb, they looked at the exact same set of facts. They saw the same things. They had the same formula, but they added one crucial thing that the other guys were missing. Right? Giants plus strongly defended cities divided by life experience times God's promise equals victory. That's really the difference between these 2 reports, isn't it? Unbelief versus faith. The 10 were viewing this situation as though they weren't sure God was going to come through, as though God might not do what He said He was going to do. And Joshua and Caleb, they weren't dismissing the hard road ahead of them, but they believed, they had seen countless times over and over again that God would do what He said He would do, that God would do the things that only He could do. Take Joshua's name, for example. We read a moment ago that he was renamed for this. Now, do you know why you're named what you're named? Maybe your parents just liked the name. Maybe it was a Bible name. Maybe it was a family name. It's been passed down. Maybe they chose your name because it has some sort of meaning, some sort of significance. Sometimes that happens today, right? A name is chosen because of what it means. Back in the Bible times, this was a much bigger thing. Names actually did mean something. People were named for very specific reasons. And we see a little bit of that today, but not quite as much as back then. But in the Old Testament, names were very important. They took on a huge significance. And we read in verse 16, like what we saw a moment ago, it says that the name was changed from Hoshea to Joshua. Now, Hoshea, it means salvation. Joshua means the Lord saves. Now, this might seem like a subtle difference to you and me, but I think it's actually quite significant. Salvation can just be a generic faith, that something's going to come along and save you at the right time. It's this idea. But to believe that the Lord saves is to believe in someone. And Joshua and Moses, who did the renaming, they had faith that the Lord was going to save them. Now, I don't want to miss this or gloss over this idea that faith is hard. You think back to the stories that we've mentioned, though we haven't studied them in depth in this series, right? The Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and the only way that they were going to be let go was the 10 plagues that resulted in Pharaoh letting the people go, and they're on the run, and the enemy's chasing them. The only way is through the Red Sea. And the Red Sea wasn't just some little creek. Depending on where they crossed, it could have been anywhere from a few to several miles wide. But God parts it, and they walk across on dry land, and now they're on the border of a foreign land with several cities. They're surviving in the wilderness as they travel. This is not an easy task. Faith is hard. And any person with earthly wisdom could have looked at this situation like those 10 guys did and said, we can't do that. Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. Why not? Why don't we put stock in our own understanding? Why aren't we to rely on that? Because when we do that, when we just take our life experience as the meter, the gauge for what we're going to tackle and what we aren't, fear is going to win out over our faith most, if not every time. Because we look at situations that God has placed us in. We look at assignments that God has given to you or assignments that God has given to me. And we say, that's too hard. I can't do that. I don't have the skills to do that. I don't have the strength to do that. And we say, metaphorically, those people are too tall. Those cities are too strong. No way. And if I were going to go and do that, that would mean I'd have to sacrifice some things. Maybe I'd have to sacrifice that friendship or sacrifice some money or some time, or I'd have to sacrifice that job or that relationship or maybe even my safety, whatever it might be. Faith is hard. But maybe that's the point. Think with me, what if faith were easy? What if the tasks that God gave you and me to do were easy? What if the assignments we had, we could accomplish no problem? What happens then? Beloved, God is not in the business of giving us tasks that are easy. Why not? Because if the tasks were easy, we wouldn't need faith. Right? Faith is the ability to go through an assignment that if we went to that assignment and we're just left to our own understanding, our own interpretations, our own scouting report, our own life experience, we would never do. But instead, by faith, we get to the other side of the assignment and we look back and we say, only God could do that. Faith is looking at an assignment and saying, I could never. And God responding, you're right, you can't, but I can. Of course the promised land was going to be filled with giants. Of course it was going to be heavily defended. God wanted them to know that, and He wanted them to be able to say, only God can do that. Only God can deliver what He's promising. If the land wasn't occupied, if it was filled with a bunch of weak people and just some tents here and there, they'd be able to say, we did that. But what the majority of them forgot was that God always does what He says He's going to do. God always shows up. God always keeps His promises. Several weeks ago, I sold my motorcycle. Sold it for a variety of reasons. And I sold it on Facebook Marketplace. Now, have you ever tried to sell anything on Facebook Marketplace? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Maybe you've bought some things on Marketplace. If you're not familiar with Facebook Marketplace, it's kind of like an online flea market or just an online garage sale way that you can post something that you've got, take a few pictures, here's what I have, you list a price, people can send you messages if they're interested, and you can negotiate back and forth, and then you set up a time to exchange the funds and to give them whatever it is that you're selling. So I tried to sell my motorcycle on Facebook Marketplace, and I've sold lots of things on Marketplace before. I've bought lots of things on Marketplace. When you sell things on Facebook Marketplace, the bad guys are always trying to stay a step ahead. So scams are common. It's not, it's common, it's not rare to, get a message from somebody that in the end wants to send some money in kind of a fishy way that in the end you won't end up getting. And so you've just got to be careful. You got to be aware of what it is that you're doing and who you're trying to deal with. Or oftentimes there are genuine people on there that do have an intent to buy it, but they don't meet you when they say they're going to meet you. They don't stick to their promises, and in the end, then you're still just stuck with the product. So I list my motorcycle on Facebook Marketplace, and I get several questions. I had it on there for several weeks. I get several folks sending me messages about it and expressing interest. And you can always kind of tell the scams because it's these people that, like, within their first sentence, they want to buy it for cash. They don't try to negotiate, and they'll buy it sight unseen, but you got to deliver it to them later that day or something like that. And you're just kind of, yeah, something doesn't feel right here. So in the midst of all these messages, there was one guy finally that I had been corresponding with that actually seemed interested in buying it. And so we settled on a place to meet and a time. And he's communicating in just very broken English. And I'm having trouble understanding all of his messages. And there's just something about it. He says he's coming from Cleveland. And it just feels a little doubtful to me. But that morning, he tells me when he's going to leave. It's a few-hour drive over to where we're at. So about an hour into his drive, he sends me a video that's of his truck dashboard, and the video is showing me, there's all these warning lights flashing on his dashboard, his hazard lights are on, and it appears that his truck is broken down. So I just respond back to him and said, "Are you having engine trouble?" And he said, "Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it today." And I'm just kind of like, that just doesn't feel quite right. In fact, when you looked at the video of his truck dashboard, it said his truck had over 500,000 miles on it. I mean, I suppose that's possible, but something just wasn't quite right about this. He says, "I'm going to go to Enterprise tomorrow and rent a truck." Okay. Well, I didn't hear from him at all the next day. The day after that, he sends me just kind of this weird picture of an Enterprise car rental agency. And it was like he tried to take the picture kind of off to his side and nobody knowing he took the picture because it's kind of tilted, it's a little bit blurry. But apparently this is supposed to be proof that he's in an Enterprise. He says, "Okay, I'm renting the truck." And I'm like, this just doesn't seem right. I never did hear from him again after that. That evening, I said to my wife, "Why is it so hard to sell this motorcycle? Like, I'm not losing anything but some time, right? Like, I'm not sending them any money, certainly, and I'm not promising. I still have the title, so I haven't really lost anything other than just some mental peace of mind." It's like, why is this so hard? It was kind of exhausting in a way. Now I get in the span of problems, this isn't that big of a problem. But in its moment, it's kind of taking its toll because it's just this up and down. Are they going to come through? Aren't they going to come through? Are they going to come through? Aren't they going to come through? And it was just a lot. And I said to my wife, "Why is it so hard to find somebody to buy this motorcycle? What are they getting out of this to just keep stringing me along?" A couple of days later, get a message from another individual who's very interested and very communicative. And we are messaging back and forth very quickly. We agree on a price, we agree on a time to meet, and he says he's coming from Ohio again, but he doesn't say specifically Cleveland. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh boy, here we go again. So he tells me that he's going to be heading out. And I say, "Okay, well, when you get about an hour away, send me a text. Let me know that you're going to be an hour away so that I'll know to be able to come and meet you." But still, I'm like, this, seems too good to be true that this happened so quickly. I don't have trying hard not to get my hopes up anyway. So about an hour before we're supposed to meet, he sends me a picture. And the picture is kind of like taken from his dashboard. It's got the open road there. He's on the interstate, it would appear. And within the picture is his GPS. And it appears that the GPS is set to the location we had said that we were going to meet. And I thought, oh, well, if he's trying to fool me, he's going to a lot of lengths to try to scam me here. So I said, I might as well go. Because I'd rather go and have him not show up than not go and miss the chance to sell the motorcycle. So I go. We had set up meeting in this public parking lot. So I get to the parking lot at the appointed time. He's not there. Here we go again. Why is this so difficult? And sure enough, though, as it would happen, he comes in a couple minutes later, and I thought, oh, okay, He did show up. And we end up, exchanging funds, the title, and he took the motorcycle, and away he went. But, up until that point, even after he was there to a degree, I wasn't sure it was actually going to happen until we had exchanged the money and the title. And the whole thing, trying to sell my motorcycle, as I alluded to, that was not an enjoyable experience, right? Because why is it so hard for people to fulfill their promises? And you're not sure if they are or they aren't. But friends, that's how the Israelites were living. Can you imagine what life would be like if God didn't fulfill his promises? If we weren't sure God was going to do what he said he was going to do? What if God had like a 70% success rate on what he promised? Can you imagine how things would change, how our decisions would be impacted? And so, in other words, in a manner of speaking, God always shows up to buy the motorcycle. The book of Numbers is a history book that tells us the story of a group of people that, for the most part, lived as if they didn't believe God was going to show up. That lived as if they believed God wasn't going to do what he had promised to do. They were letting fear get in the way of their faith. And friends, you've got a choice to make. If you are a Jesus follower, God has given you an assignment. And it might look like different things at different times. Our speaker last week, Jeff Demerly, talked about this. To some, he's entrusted 10 talents or 5 or 1. It might look like something different for you than it does for me, than it does for the next person. I mean, right now, your assignment, maybe it's just got you thinking about some of the things that Jeff talked about last week. Maybe there's this nagging thought in the back of your mind that missions and ministry, full-time ministry, is something that you need to be taking a closer look at. And yet you start to think, well, I could never. They're too strong. The cities are too well defended, so to speak. Maybe the assignment just has you having that gospel conversation with that family member or coworker. Maybe your assignment is having to confront a brother or sister in the faith because of the sin that they've fallen into. Maybe your assignment right now might just be intentional about the raising of your kids. Maybe your assignment is to provide spiritual or emotional or physical, or maybe all three care to someone who's close to you. Maybe your assignment right now is to give sacrificially of your time and or your money to someone who just needs some help. Maybe your assignment is as simple as finding that one thing that you can be deployed on and taking a step to move that from just an idea into a reality. And any of these things, any of the assignments is hard. Faith is hard. There's no question about it. But maybe that's the point. Because God calls us to remember what he's promised to do. He's promised to be with you. He's promised to not forget about you. He's promised to work all things for his glory and your eventual good. God has promised to provide a comforter for you. God has promised to go before you and to give you strength. And friends, our job, our assignment is to live like God will do what he has promised to do. That's application number 1. But what happens when we don't? What happens when, like the Israelites, we live like God isn't going to do what he's promised to do? That's the application that we'll look at next week as we take on chapter 14. Trust we'll see you then. God bless you.